to order, please. Councillors, it's 6 o'clock, and so we need to start the meeting. Could everybody take their seats, please? Thank you. So this is the first meeting of the Planning Review Committee in the current municipal. This is the first meeting of the Planning Review Committee in the current municipal year. So the first item on the agenda is to elect a chair. Are there any nominations for a chair of the committee, please?
Could I nominate Councillor Fry?
Thank you. Seconder?
Yes, seconded.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? In that case, Councillor Fry is elected unopposed, and I would ask him to take the chair, please.
Thank you very much. The next item is to elect vice chair. Do I have any nominations? It's only going to be for this meeting. If I drop dead, they will have to take over. May I suggest? No, okay, go on.
I'm happy to nominate Councillor Japari Malvini.
So, congratulations, Hosni. Okay, apologies, absence and substitutions. Councillor Ligo is being substituted by Councillor Arshad. Councillor Waite is being substituted by Councillor Diggins, and Councillor Ross-Smith is being substituted by Councillor Smoten. Are there any declarations of interest? And I think Sally Fleming is going to make a bit of an announcement to explain.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to remind members of the committee who've called this application to the committee of the need to declare whether you've come to the meeting with an open mind, so that I'll repeat that. I would like to remind members of the committee who called this application to this committee of the need to declare whether they have come to the meeting with an open mind, such that they are able to judge the application fairly and on its merits. If you are unable to make such a declaration, then you should recuse yourself from considering the application. And I understand that there are 4 committee members in this position. Secondly, I would also like to remind members that if they are a member of an organisation which has commented on the application, and if you have been involved in preparing that representation, you need to consider whether you have come to the meeting with an open mind and are able to judge the application fairly and on its merits. Again, if you are unable to do so, then you should recuse yourself from the item. In both cases, members who are affected by either of these matters should declare their position so that it can be minuted for transparency purposes. Thank you, Chair.
I suspect all of us are either a member of a relevant organisation or supported the call-in. I will start first. I am a member of both Cyclops and Oxford Preservation Trust, but I declare that I am approaching this application with an open mind. Mike Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I've been reminded that I was on Cabinet when this item was discussed there 2 years ago, though, to be honest, I don't have any memory of it, and I have no particular preconceived view on the application.
Lizzie Diggins.
I'm a City Council appointee to the Oxford Preservation Trust, which may have commented on this planning application as it comments on many, but I was not a part of those discussions and come to this committee with an open mind.
Yeah, I was one of the councillors who called in this application. I'm also a member of Cyclox, who I think have commented on the application, but I'm coming to this meeting with an open mind.
Thank you. Amir.
Thank you, Chair. I'm one of the city councillors who supported the call-in. Like others, I'm coming to the meeting to see the application with an open mind. Thank you.
Husnia.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I supported the call-in, but I'm here with an open mind. I also have received a number of emails from residents on both sides of the discussion, and I've spoken to one member of the public who rang me about it too. But I'm here with an open mind and will consider it in its merits as it's being discussed now.
Chris Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a member of Oxford YIMBY, which campaigns on housing matters, but hasn't taken any position on this planning application. I also explicitly declined to a councillor who requested that I call this in to do so, but I did that on practical grounds, which are not planning matters, and I will approach the judgment of the planning question with an open mind.
And Steve Goddard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Like several colleagues, I'm one of those who called this application in, and like probably all colleagues, I've received a number of emails about it in both directions, some of which I've had time to reply to, in which I've said that I will approach this as I will with an open mind and with regard to the planning requirements. Thank you.
We thank you all very much indeed. We are now going to proceed to the speakers. First, those against. Oh, sorry, I jumped too far. It doesn't say it here. The presentation, please, by Sarah Delacose.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Great. Okay, so I'd like to start with the verbal update. Since the publication of the report, I have received 17 additional letters of representation. These have been received from properties in St John Street, Buckingham Street, Western Road, Monmouth Road, Alexandra Road, Wytham Street, as well as the University of Oxford, and as well as a few that did not disclose their specific address. The objections raised relate to the lack of the publicity of the application, that the application would require the felling of trees, the Gasworks Bridge is located nearby, the area under the railway bridge floods, no carbon footprint has been produced for the bridge. The money for the bridge could be used for other things. It's not clear if the bridge is required for OSNI or as a standalone application. The towpath will be closed to facilitate the development. The bridge will destroy the nature reserve. Money would benefit more people if it was spent on improving existing cycle routes in the city. There is a lack of evidence on how many people would benefit from the bridge compared to the number of people who would be adversely affected by it.
Sorry, could you speak a little bit slower?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. The application was not supported by an EIA. It will have a detrimental impact on biodiversity in the area. It will give rise to noise pollution. Can the route that runs past Gibbs Crescent along the back of the ice rink remain open? The sequential test wasn't taken. The fields in trust can't legally be developed. The Gasworks Bridge is a heritage asset. It will be built on a floodplain, and a BREEAM assessment wasn't carried out on the bridge. The letters in support relate to that the bridge contributes to the delivery of the objectives of the local plan and the West End and Oseley Mead SPD. It will deliver safe pedestrian and cycle routes from the west of the city centre. It will contribute to economic benefits extending throughout the county and beyond. It will enhance connectivity and increase the sense of joint identity of Oseley and Oxpens, helping with the West End Innovation District as a whole. It will fulfil the ecological potential of the area. It will enable landscaping, replanting, encourage biodiversity of plants and animals. It will boost the attractiveness of these so-called soft mode travel options, as many prefer using cars because walking and cycling feels unsafe. It creates an alternative north-south route across the river. The Foley Bridge and Botley Road Bridge are far too narrow and hazardous, particularly for vulnerable road users. There is an urgent need to provide a safe, rapid, higher capacity travel link between the west, south and central Oxford. The positioning of the bridge is an effective compromise reflecting the challenging geography between Botley Road and Grandpont. Most of the issues raised have already been addressed in the committee reports, but I would also like to respond to some of the other points. With regard to allowing the route around Gibbs Crescent to be kept open, this is not something that we can require or condition, as the details will have to be approved by the County Council as part of a CTMP. With regard to noise, officers are of the opinion that the inclusion of the bridge may bring with it a change in noise in association with its use, but the bridge is considered sufficiently distanced from neighbouring properties so not to give rise to unacceptable levels of noise. The BREEAM requirements in policy RE1 relate to new non-build residential developments of 1,000 metres squared or more. The bridge doesn't fall under this threshold. The Gascoigne Bridge is The Gasworks Bridge is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset, and therefore the test in the NPPF, which is required when dealing with designated heritage assets, is not relevant. Paragraph 209 of the NPPF instead deals with non-designated heritage assets. The development is not considered to adversely impact on the Gasworks Bridge due to the separation distance between them and the character of the area, which includes other elements of infrastructure. Whilst the bridge will be visible, it would not detract from the Gasworks Bridge or its setting and would be viewed in the wider context. In addition to those updates, 3 additional SUDS conditions, as suggested by the County Council, have been added to the list of conditions in the report, and the contaminated land conditions have been amended to be more specific. Just going to run through the presentation now. So I'll just flick through the presentation. So you can see the site plan here, the red line area, which includes the bridge and the associated pathworks. You can see here that it would cross and then it would lead on past the ice rink, eventually joining Oxpens Road. On the other side here, you can see where the path then merges and goes under the railway bridge. So this is the landscape plan. And again, you can see the route under the bridge, where the bridge lands and where it sits by the ice rink. And you can see how it would land on the southern side. Here's a more detailed zoomed in version of the North Landscape Plan. And this is the South Landscape Plan. This shows the bridge layout and the bridge elevation. Here's the bridge section and the materials for the bridge. Okay, that's fine. So yeah, this is the materials for the bridge. Okay. Yeah, so this is the bridge elevation. And you can see the waves here that's been designed into it. There are some visualizations which help as well. And this is the section of the bridge showing the width and one of the piers underneath it. This is a plan showing the materials. You can see that it will be a steel bridge with a handrail of timber or a similar material. The materials have been conditioned, so we would see samples of them before they're installed. And this is a visualization from Grand Pont. As you can see here, where the footpath goes into the bridge. This is a visualization from the towpath from this side, and you can see the bridge in the distance, and you can see the ice rink there.
Can you please not shout out? I mean, it's not very visible because it's behind some trees by the river. That's the problem.
This is a visualization from Oxpens Road. You can see the ice rink here, where my mouse is, and you can see the bridge. And these are some photographs of the site. So this is taken from the Oxpens Road. This is taken from the meadows. Below, yep. So this is taken from the northern side. Another photo from the northern side. From the southern side, you can see the ice rink in the background. Another photo from the southern side. And here are some more visualizations. So you can see the bridge here, the ice rink in the background. Here's another visualization of the bridge. And a further visualization. That's the end of the presentation. I'll just continue. So the application was called in for the following reason. The building of a new bridge adjacent to an existing bridge is not an efficient use of land or resources to deliver sustainable growth and development, and it is therefore contrary to policies RE1 and RE2 of the local plan. The report sets out officers' considerations with regard to the call-in reason, specifically policy RE1, which relates to sustainable design construction, and RE2, which relates to efficient use of land. Policy RE1 states that planning permission will only be granted where it can be demonstrated that the following sustainable design and construction principles have been incorporated where relevant. The application included a sustainability section which set out how the relevant principles apply, which officers have considered and found to be acceptable. The call-in reason also refers to sustainable growth, and officers consider that the bridge would in fact help deliver long-term sustainable growth by encouraging the use of the bridge over the use of private transport option, which is a view shared by Oxfordshire County Council Highways. Policy RE2 refers to efficient use of land and states that development proposals must make best use of site capacity in a manner compatible with the site itself, the surrounding area, and broader considerations of the needs of Oxford. As set out in the report, the bridge has been designed to respond to the site taking into account its setting and surroundings. Its design, width, and overall appearance has been considered to ensure a balance is struck between its impact on the area and usability. The bridge has been considered in the context of the other infrastructure elements in the area, which is visible and forms part of the nature reserve's character, and officers consider that the inclusion of other bridges in the vicinity does not in itself make this bridge unacceptable. The application seeks permission for a new cycle and pedestrian bridge over the Thames from Grandpont to Oxpens Meadow. The bridge would have a steel structure and would span 98.9 metres with a river span of 23.39 metres. The bridge will have a deck width of 3.5 metres. In addition, the proposal seeks to improve the adjoining footpath. On the north side, the bridge will link to the existing footpath leading up to Oxpens Road. On the south side, the pathworks will seek to improve the gradient of the path inside of the application boundary. The footpaths will also be widened. The bridge has been designed to respond to its setting. The bridge will feature a slender deck and curved soffits to maximise the transparency of the bridge on the site. The asymmetrical structural waves in the design have been designed to direct and guide views. The bridge will be steel with concrete piers. Officers consider that the bridge responds positively to the character and topography of the site and context. With regard to impact on neighbouring amenity, the development is not considered to have an unacceptable impact due to the separation distance between the site and neighbouring properties. The bridge has been designed to comply with the National Guidance on Design Infrastructure. No technical objections have been received to the application. So to conclude, officers have considered the application to be acceptable in terms of principle, design, impact on neighbouring amenity, highways, trees, biodiversity, and the other issues set out in the report. And therefore, your officers are recommending approval subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement to secure the BNG offsetting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Now we turn to the speakers. First, those against, and then those for. Normally, you're only allowed a total of 5 minutes, but since there are 4 speakers and 3 on the other side, I thought I would increase it to 6 minutes per group. So the first group speaking against, you have an average of 1.5 minutes each, but I don't know whether you've agreed amongst yourselves how you're going to divide the speaking. The order in which I have it here is Dan Glazebrook first. Do you want, and then I have Deborah Glasswood then Evelyn Sanderson, and then Councillor Lois Muddiman. Is that the order you wish to speak? Only 2. Okay, you still have a total of 6 minutes. Okay, Dan Glazebrook first. Oh, okay. Okay, Lois. Sorry, we'll tell you when 3 minutes has been reached.
Thank you, Chair. There is no environmental impact assessment or an EIA for the planning application. Planning officers' sole justification for this is that the bridge is a standalone project, and yet there is clear evidence that this is not the case. For example, on the Oxford West End website, the bridge is referred to as enabling infrastructure. On the Oxpens website, as part of their second consultation, they say, we've updated the Oxpens master plan to make sure our proposals integrate effectively with the proposed location for the Oxpens River Bridge, notably removing a building behind the ice rink and relocating the hotel. On Oxford City Council's own LinkedIn page, in invitation to a consultation, they say it is part of a series of projects that will transform the West End in the coming years. On Oxford City Council's website, part of their feedback after consultation says the bridge proposal, therefore, is part of a series of projects that will transform the West End. And also on the Oxford City Council website, a notice of decision made in 2021 to design consultants necessary to deliver the bridge, which is required to facilitate the redevelopment of Oxpens and Osney. The council accepted the growth deal funding to deliver a new pedestrian cycle bridge at Oxpens, Osney, and that link planned new development. And of course, the local plan 2036 states that the new bridge is required by Osney Mead development and should be part of the Osney Mead master plan. And at the previous meeting in March, the lead planner of the Oxpens developer spoke to say the bridge is integral to the wider plan. So, integral, required by, integrate effectively, facilitate, linked, enabling infrastructure. Surely no rational person can agree with OCC's case that the proposed bridge is a stand-alone project. It is, in fact, in OCC's own words, part of a series, and an EIA should therefore have been done, and it wasn't. On that basis, if this planning application is approved, it would be unlawful. And these are the risk factors. If you approve this application, work will start on the bridge. Objectors will then launch a judicial review because there is no EIA. Once that process begins, all the work on the bridge must cease until it is resolved. And so there is an extremely high risk the bridge would not be completed by March 25 deadline, and OCC would have to repay part of the funds and be left with an incomplete bridge. I've got 2 more paragraphs. May I continue?
Yes, it just comes out of Dan's time, but continue.
But if you refuse the application, there's a risk that the applicant will appeal. However, the applicant is OCC, and if OCC chooses to appeal itself, there will still be a delay, meaning the work is not completed by March 25 and the funds must be repaid. Therefore, the financial and reputational risk to OCC is less if you reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. We believe it would be unlawful to grant planning permission to this bridge today. Firstly, there is the ecological destruction and urbanization entailed by the bridge, which clearly breaches a number of local and planning policies, as it's fundamentally altering the character of the nature park. It is in breach of RE7, G7, MPPF 15. I'm happy to go into how this is so during questions. Secondly, the bridge has been incorrectly characterized as essential infrastructure in order to circumvent the ban on building in flood zone 3B. We've been told the bridge meets this definition because it's required as a flood evacuation route for residents of the future Osney Mead development. I have the documents here. If that is the case, it cannot be classified as standalone. If it's not, it cannot be classified as essential infrastructure. Linked to this, as we've heard, the bridge has been wrongly classified as a standalone development in order to circumvent the need for an environmental impact assessment. The Court of Appeal established last year in the Tewkesbury case that a project cannot be classified as standalone when, quote, the proposed development is an integral part of a wider project. That's the key term. The very first words uttered in favour of the bridge at the last month's planning committee were, and I quote, the bridge is integral to the wider plan for the West End of Oxford. These are the words of the lead planner of the Oxpens development, Paul Comerford. So, you know, unless he's lying, then it needs the impact assessment. We received an email yesterday from Robert Freshwater, the County Council's infrastructure development lead, where he refers to the bridge as a, quote, key requirement for the future potential of Osney Mead. Specifically, oh, and indeed, of course, funding was procured solely on the basis that it was integral to the Osney Mead development. It came from a pot that is for unlocking housing. We've been repeatedly told it must this money can only be spent to unlock housing. It's therefore integral to the Oseney Mead development where the housing is supposed to be. Specifically, the Oseney River Bridge is an integral part of the connection between Oseney Mead and the city centre required by the local plan 2036. This connection must connect all the way, obviously, to Oseney Mead. It cannot simply be split into two parts. That's known as salami slicing and is illegal under the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017. I have the details here if you want to ask questions. That was established by the Court of Appeal in the Tewkesbury case last year. That case established that the basis for classifying a bridge as standalone or not is, as I said, whether any development is an integral part of a wider project and not, as councillors were incorrectly informed at the last planning committee, whether development serves no other purpose outside of a wider project.
Thank you very
I have several other legal breaches. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Let us now turn to the speakers for the applicant. I've got three names here. I've got Paul Comerford, I've got Jenny Barker, and I've got Councillor Louise Upton. Are you all speaking? Could you, you two go back and be ready to come forward when we go to questions, please? Again, you have a total of 6 minutes. Who will speak first?
I will.
Okay, over to you, Mr. Comerford.
Thank you. The proposed bridge represents, the proposed bridge represents a key priority for the delivery of city infrastructure in a defined area of change that will provide significant public benefit whilst directly responding to the Oxford Local Plan's objectives for infrastructure provision. The bridge is evidenced and examined as part of the wider plans for the West End of Oxford, including those proposals for key development sites, as clearly established by the West End SPD. The bridge's location has been carefully considered, balancing the need for a direct, convenient route, impact on open spaces, and ensuring it is deliverable. The bridge will provide significantly enhanced connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists between existing communities, as well as Oseney Mead and Ox Pens, to name but two major allocated sites. This will be an improvement to active travel choices in the area, promoting the delivery of sustainable growth that is established in the local plan. In terms of design, the bridge will be a slender and elegant addition to the area, and as officers have confirmed, it will sit comfortably in its setting, addressing both the NPPF and policy RE2. The materials and the methods of construction have been developed with the county in terms of sustainability, meeting the requirements of policy RE1, together with functionality, design, and management. Its impact on heritage setting has been carefully and extensively considered as part of the submission. The landscaping proposals include neat tree planting with a wider variety of native species that will contribute to legibility of new and existing routes, together with tree canopy gain. In summary, the proposals conform with the development plan, and the application before members responds directly to evidenced and examined planning policy, and we support the officer's recommendation for approval.
Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Jenny Barker. I work for the City Council as Regeneration Lead. And I wanted to just add to what Paul was saying by talking a little bit about the rail bridge where objections were raised at the last meeting. The route of to using the rail bridge is actually longer and less direct than the proposed new bridge. And the access, particularly on the north side, is narrower and does not meet current standards or guidance. The access ramp from the north is narrow, with limited room to pass. The footpath along the Castle Mill stream is narrow, and there's not room to widen it between the curtilages of the dwellings and the stream. The alternative is across the meadows via the Castle Mill stream bridge, which is only just over 2 metres wide and lands in the floodplain. And the parapets of the bridge would need to be raised to meet current standards for cycling. The potential to improve the bridge was looked at by the County Council back in 2016, and they did identify some works that could take place. But even with these improvements, it would not meet current standards. and would result in a substantial change to the area, including a raised path across the meadows, which would require EA approvals and would be closer to housing. If these works were possible, there would still be no material savings and the standards would be less, and no additional capacity would be created in the same way as the proposed bridge. So really, I just wanted to also make councillors aware that the funding that has been made available is for the proposal that's before you, and it's not for any alternative. If the current proposal does not go ahead, it would need to be returned to the county council. So I would just say that we believe that the proposal is for an attractive new crossing across the river, across the meadows, and minimises the impact on the area concerned. There is mitigation proposed both in terms of the trees and biodiversity in accordance with the local plan policies.
You have before you an application for a rather elegant and simple bridge designed to carry people on foot or by bike from Oseley Mead into the west end of the city centre. It's going to join up with recently improved routes across Willow Walk and St George's Field, so people cycling in from Botley or Hinksey to get directly into the city centre can do that completely away from car traffic. And, you know, if we want to get people to use active travel, we need to make it easy, safe and attractive. So I think this bridge will be used straight away by plenty of people, but far more once the Oseley Mead and Oxpens West Ends are developed. Of course, some of the existing routes, for some, that existing route across the Gasworks Bridge will continue to be the one they want to use. But if they're happy with that 360-degree circle you have to go down and then a narrow path along the river squashed between the water and the garden fences. But we need this bridge to do much more, right? We need people to be able to get from Oseley to Oxpens by this bridge that's going to go straight in. It's going to land higher up at the back of the ice rink. So this bridge will be usable when the current path is at times not usable. And for me, you know, how great it will be to get a bit of infrastructure in first before we develop Oxpens and Oseley Mead, so that from day one, when new homes and new jobs come there, there's going to be this really visible, really legible route, easily just easily legible for people to see for walking and cycling. An awful lot of work was done to choose the location of it. It only touches about 1% of the Grand Pont Nature Reserve. So your job today, everyone, is just to decide what's consistent with our local plan. I think you've been shown it is.
Okay, we now go to questions from committee members to speakers or to officers. I see. Yes, sorry, return. There's not enough space, I think, for you all to sit there. So if you return, but how will we? We'll have to call them up separately. I'm going to suggest we do get one more chair so that there are 5, and then you can all sit there, all 5 of you. But it seems to sit there. Yes, I know. Yes. And I think members are familiar with planning committee. The questions should actually be directed initially through the chair. That's my wonderful role. So thank you very much. I'm not going to take them in any, I don't know who put their hands up first. I'm going to choose left, right. So nearest is Councillor Rowley, Mike Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. I have 2 questions which are probably for the, through you, Chair, for the applicant. The first is we have in the original committee report and paragraph 8.14 a concern raised by the Cyclox group about the safety of the bridge for cyclists, and I would like to the width of the bridge and whether or not the internal lean rails might provide a hazard to passing cyclists. So I think it's important that we have a response to that, please. The second question is a concern that has been raised since the first meeting by COSATS, the Coalition for Active Travel Group, about how the cycle and pedestrian route across the bridge fit into existing routes from the ice rink towards the railway station and the city centre, and it would be interesting to know. Obviously, this is a potentially important piece of cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, so it'd be interesting to know what thought has been given to how it fits into a safe and walkable or cyclable route to the city centre. Thanks.
I'm just trying to decide. Sorry. Someone's pressing a red. There will be many questions. I'm going to suggest we take one or two more. I will aggregate and then summarize and put them back to applicant, officers or objectors. So from this side, Councillor Smoten, Chris Smoten.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions for our officers. Number one is a procedural question. So obviously the application was called into this committee citing a specific pair of policies, RE1 and RE2, whereas a lot of what we just heard relates to very different concerns about the absence of an EIA and other topics. Where are we procedurally on judging matters other than that question of RE1 and RE2? And then the second question is not a meta question. It is about this matter of integrality. I'm sure that's not a word, whether something is integral or not. It seems likely from what's been described that for the Osney Mead to development to go ahead or to go ahead in a particular form, then this bridge or something equivalent or similar is required. But is that what integral means? Or does integral need it to go both directions? I.e., does integral also require the opposite, that for the, wait, which one did I say? I said that for Osney Mead to happen, you need the bridge. What about the question, for the bridge to happen, you need Osney Mead? Do you need both directions for this integral concept, or don't you? And in either case, what is the justification about whether it is or is not integral?
Thank you. I'm going to go one more question from committee members. I'll take, well, I was going to take alternate sides. Lizzie Diggins.
Yeah, mine's sort of, Councillor Smoten's basically asked my question, but I just wanted to kind of sound out of the concerns raised if we're allowed to do so procedurally, which is about the question of what would be the requirements of having an EIA and whether you could shed any more light on the Tewkesbury case. And I'm addressing this via you, Chair, if I may, to the planning officers in particular to get your perspective, because I feel like we've had one perspective, but I'd appreciate the planning officers one in particular. Thank you.
Okay, we have, well, I'm trying to summarize the 6 questions. I'm going to start with officers. I mean, I think it's important whether RE1 and RE2, which were cited for the call-in, are they the only things we can? We look much wider.
No, I mean, it's open to the committee today to consider the application as if this was the first time it had come to committee. You have got a specific reason for a call-in, which the supplemental report attached to this deals with, but it's open to you to consider everything.
Another, were you going to say something, Sally?
Yes, I was just going to endorse that, but obviously the previous decision obviously is a material consideration in your consideration of the application, and obviously the reason for the call-in is as Andrew has said. So,
thank you. Then another fairly fundamental question is is this integral or not? And Councillor Smoke and Chris was talking about which way round does the causality go, but is this an integral case?
Thank you, Chair. Well, the definition of integral, I did look it up before the meeting, is it should be something is necessary, essential, fundamental. Now that seems to me to be saying that the bridge has to be contingent on the developments if it was to be integral. My understanding from what I've been told is that the bridge it will obviously be good for those prospective developments. However, it would also be good for the connectivity within the city from one areas to other areas, and that the bridge could and would presumably go ahead whether or not those other new developments go ahead or not, and vice versa. My understanding is that if the bridge doesn't go ahead, then both the proposed developments could come ahead on their own. So in my view, I don't think it is integral, which is why we say that it wasn't necessary to do EIA.
You've jumped ahead to one of the, two of the other questions, because EIA and Tewkesbury, but I thought you were going to say something on integral, no?
No, Sally's answered the question. I can give a bit of background to what's in the OSNI, the West End Vision SPD, but I think Sally's covered it already.
Could I give a response as well?
Sorry. It's via the chair. That's the role of the chair. So what I want to know now is on the EIA. Why is there no EIA, or have you already answered it because you see it as not integral? And what's the relevance of the Tewkesbury case?
Thank you, Chair. Well, if I can sort of go back a bit, because there was another case which the objectors haven't mentioned, but was in fact mentioned in the Tewkesbury case, and that's the case of R on the application of Wingfield against Canterbury City Council. And that looked at the question of whether something was one project or two. There were two developments, and it was a question of whether it was one composite project or whether it was two. And obviously, dependent on that was whether the proper EIA was carried out. And the judge gave some helpful sort of pointers in which to consider when you're looking at that question. Firstly, whether or not there was common ownership between the sites, the two developments. So where two sites were owned or promoted by the same person, that could indicate they constituted a single project. In this case, the bridge, the land is in the vast majority of it is owned by the City Council. As I understand it, the Oxpen site is owned, the developable part is owned by Oxwed, the company, and the area that won't be developed is owned by the City Council. So the two sites are different in that respect. The second point was, are they simultaneous determinations? So where two applications were considered and determined by the same committee on the same day and subject to reports which cross-refer to one another, that could indicate they constituted a single project. And obviously that is not the case today. You are only considering the bridge. The third point was the functional interdependence, where one part of a development could not function without another. That could indicate that they constituted a single project. And as I've said previously, my understanding is that the bridge can go ahead without the future developments. The future developments could go ahead without the bridge. And the last point was standalone projects, where a development was justified on its own merits and would be pursued independently of another development. That could indicate that it constituted a single individual project that was not an integral part of a more substantial scheme. We've heard that there is funding for the bridge, and my understanding is that the bridge would go ahead whether or not future developments took place. So on that basis, on the basis of the criteria that the judge set out in the Wingfield case, my view was that the bridge is not integral to the future developments, and therefore EIA for it was not required. The difference between the Tewkesbury case is that in that case it was a bridge as well, and the judge remarked that the bridge without the future developments or the developments that were adjacent to it would go to nowhere. So there would be no point having the bridge, and I think that is a difference. Chair.
I will take now Hosnier, Councillor Jafari Mabini.
Firstly, I have a procedural question, Chair, for you, please, which is, so far the planning officers have spoken. Would you like those questions first and then questions to those who are speaking from members of the public, or do they get a chance to also comment on the questions that were directed generally?
I mean, just in terms of how I intend to handle it, I'm aggregating questions. The important fundamental ones I feel about EIA, Tewkesbury, the question of whether we're only considering RE1 and 2 and the like, which I think has now been considered. I've got two questions for the applicant. One is the Cyclops question, one is the COSAT question, which Mike Rowley asked. And I'm now inviting you to ask your question.
Sorry, Chair, can I raise a point of order? Just to check, we're hearing a response from some of the officers, but if we have questions on those responses, are we waiting our turn? And because I suspect it'll be a very long evening and people will forget what was said earlier, or are you inviting us as councillors making the decision to ask questions on the responses we're getting as we hear the responses? Because there's quite a lot that's been said that really needs clarifying before we can move on to lots of the other issues that are going on. So I just want to understand, I've got lots of questions based on what's just been said. Do you want me to save them and ask them later, or are you inviting us to come back when speakers say something that's not been challenged?
I personally would prefer to let everyone ask their questions now, the first set, rather than comeback questions, so that you can say what are the main things you want to raise. And we need to know to whom they're directed, and then we will come and have follow-up questions, because at least everyone gets their chance fairly early on to ask their key questions. That's my preference.
Thank you. May I?
Just to answer your procedural point, the purpose of this session is for members who've got questions to raise them. It is for the chair to decide who should answer those questions, and the first port of call should really be the officers. It is only really if officers cannot answer a question that then they would be put to either the applicant or the objector. It's not a case of the objectors then commenting back. So it really is the discretion of the chair that takes precedence.
Thank you, that's very clear. Is it possible for me to ask the objectors, they didn't get a chance to read that bit, I think, about why they think, that's one of my questions, is that possible to ask the objectors a question? Or why they think RE1 and 2 are not consistent?
I think that would be an abuse of the public speaking slot. I think if you've got a question about the policies, you should raise it. The officers will answer it, and it's only if the chair thinks that there is any need for any other party to respond to it. But that would be unusual.
I understand. One of clearly the question of EIA and whether or not this is an integral part is key, because obviously we don't want, as councillors and the committee, we don't want to be making a decision that might be considered illegal. So I've had a look at I just feel that the document that was provided by the planning officers that I read was really not consistent. So on page 16, in own words, it says there's improved connectivity throughout the West End and beyond. And then again on page 18, it says...
you say, I mean, the numbers and so on, you are referring which paragraph and so on, is it?
I can't remember now. Sorry, I've just made these notes about improved connectivity throughout the West End and beyond when they were referring to the bridge development. And then again, it talks about 1.41. Again, it says considered essential Yes, and again, 1.41, it says, again, considered essential infrastructure as part of the greater development, 1.41. And again, that to me sounds like the actual document that's written speaks of it as essential infrastructure. But then if my understanding is correct, Sally, you're saying that it is not. I'm kind of just very confused there. So the agenda on the
It's this one here.
on the agenda, so I'll just try and find it.
It's paragraph, well, it's 1.24 paragraph F, which is being flexible and adaptable to future occupier needs. Within that. And then it's 1.41.
Yeah, talks about considered essential infrastructure. So I just there seems to be just a lack of consistency throughout the document about whether or not it is essential infrastructure to the further development, and that's kind of what is concerning me. So if it is, then clearly an EIA is needed. And I don't really understand why there seems to be some inconsistency there. Maybe the officers could explain, but yeah. And then I have some other questions. Would you like me to go on, Chair? Or?
Should do them, we'll collect them, yeah.
Okay. And the grounds that, again, I think the grounds, it comes back to this essential infrastructure part, is the grounds in which the council is exempting himself from the ban, from the ban on development on floodplains. It seems to again come back to this essential infrastructure point. So I would like some more clarity on that. And then the other.
Where are you referring to that? I don't see where that.
There is the ban on development on floodplain 3B, but it's being exempted for this bridge, for the bridge development. I understand, because it is exempted because it is considered because of the essential infrastructure question, if I'm correct. And then the other question that I was wanting to refer to is that we don't seem to be can someone explain about the sequential testing that has come up? We haven't really discussed the other bridge. So if the issue is that there will be a lot further traffic on this bridge, do we have evidence that the other bridge would not suffice? But there doesn't seem to be a lot of heritage assessments around whether the current bridge would suffice, because we're not really getting any evidence of how much walking and cycling there is on the bridge that is existing. I understand not very far from this particular proposal. Thank you.
I'm going to take.
Are you sure you wanted to alternate sides earlier? Are you happy for me to go? Okay, so I'm sorry, Lucy. Just a few different things, if I might raise. So I wonder if the officers could repeat their justification for integrality, if that's the word. I don't know that I was particularly swayed. It seemed as though there were some unintended consequences potentially, but that I don't know justifies deciding whether something is integral or not. And indeed, two of the three applicants speaking seem to suggest that the bridge was integral in terms of what they actually said. So I just wonder why, given that we've had two of the three applicants speaking today say that they think it's integral, how officers are deciding that we don't think it's integral, because it seems to me that that's a key point to decide whether an EIA is needed or not. I want to raise some general. Are you taking all my questions at once, Chair? Okay, fine. I'm a bit disappointed. I appreciate that the officers are under some strain and so forth in terms of their business, but I am slightly disappointed that we've been shown a presentation where there are pictures where the bridge is hidden essentially, which minimizes the potential impact of that bridge. And if I was being unkind, I might suggest that that would be because essentially the bridge could be considered, and indeed many do consider it, an eyesore, and that the attempts to potentially present pictures where the bridge is not fully visible might be to try and minimize that. The other thing is I wanted to understand a little bit further about the active travel argument that's being made. So I don't doubt that if there's a bridge there that people will use it. History has shown that to be the case, that if you make a bridge, people tend to walk across it. Kids like to play on it. People will probably cycle across it. I don't know whether that's the question we should be answering, though, which is, will people walk across the bridge or not, or cycle across the bridge? I guess the question is, if the bridge wasn't there, what is the justification to suggest that people who we think generally would walk or cycle might now decide that actually they're going to drive quite a short distance to end up in the city? And I don't know that I've seen a really clear justification for that. As I say, I'm not asking for clarification on whether a bridge is made and people will walk or cycle across it. I can accept that to be the point. But actually, what evidence is there that actually it will lead to a change in people's behaviour? The other thing is, as I said earlier, I'm mindful that officers have lots of stresses on their time. I have to be honest, though, I'm somewhat disappointed that when we, I don't know, some of you will know I work in the NHS, and when we work in the NHS, often when proposals are put to us, we get an options appraisal, and that options appraisal will have several different possibilities. And I'm somewhat disappointed that here, where there's a potential significant cost of the bridge that's involved, that actually there haven't been other options put forward, which might be, what might the costs of other, modernizing the existing bridges be, and so forth. And I don't know whether that really should, whether that's appropriate, really. I might just comment, Chair, I don't appreciate from officers making grunting sounds, and sighing whilst I'm trying to make points which I think are important. And I'm trying to ensure that, as I said, that I recognise the strain that officers have been under, but I'm not sure it's appropriate that officers sigh or roll their eyes when I make these points. And I'd appreciate it if that could be minimised, please. If not, stopped altogether. The other point I wanted to raise really was just to understand the objectors had raised a point about the potential consequence of approving the application today or not approving the application. So one of the objectors had said that if we were to pass this application today, that there's a high likelihood that then a legal challenge may be raised about the fact that an EIA is not in place. And I'd like to understand from officers what they think the likelihood of that challenge being permissible is, and what impact that might have on the application not being delivered by the March 25 deadline. And then also the reverse of that point that we heard from the objectors, which was that if we declined it, that actually the appeal process would take us beyond March 25. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first, in terms of the various questions that are being posed, I feel that the integral point has been answered at length legally by the lawyer, Sally Fleming. And unless you want it repeated, it's clear. And she gave the examples of what was integral and what wasn't. I'm not sure we need to go through it again.
Could we get it repeated? Because that's why I'd asked earlier that can we challenge that? Because I think we'd had a series of comments, but actually I don't know that we had the opportunity to challenge that interpretation.
Going to invite Andy Murdoch.
Yeah, I mean, I deal with a couple of points. Firstly, I wasn't rolling my eyes and grunting, I was thinking. So ultimately, you're not here to decide whether this is integral. The argument that's been raised about the integrality or whatever word we made up just a moment ago is not here for you to consider today. What you're considering is the planning application that's in front of you, which is for a bridge. Now, The point that's been raised about whether this is integral relates to whether an EIA should have been prepared, and that obviously is something that we've already stated why we think that is why that wasn't essentially needed. It was screened for an EIA, but we didn't think we didn't think an EIA was needed. That's a matter, I guess, if the applicants seek to challenge the decision. That's not necessarily a matter for the committee to decide today. You couldn't refuse the application on the basis that an environmental impact assessment hasn't been done, because effectively you're then trying to screen the development, and there's a number of threshold process to go through that. So that isn't necessarily for you to consider today. I don't know whether you want me to answer some of the other questions while I'm at it. But...
Well, there was one other which I feel is addressed in the report I read, which was about options appraisal, which Amir said he was disappointed with the absence about modernising the existing bridges. I thought in the presentation that was mentioned. Is that correct?
I mean, it was mentioned in the correct. You wouldn't necessarily sit here and have a discussion about all the different various costings for improvements to the other bridges. You've heard in the comments that have come forward. You've heard in the comments that have come forward why the other bridges weren't considered acceptable, or in terms of being able to deliver the active travel improvements that are being sought. You have to also, if you want to read it, it's in the OSNI SPD. The West End and OSNI SPD. It's also in the spatial framework for the OSNI SPD, which has been through the adoption process and has been ratified by council. That sets out quite clearly in there the existing connections that sit within the West End. It sets out that this bridge isn't just solely to deliver the OSNI redevelopment there. It's actually to deliver active travel improvements for existing communities that already live there, and also to improve the regeneration of the West End area, both in terms of green and blue infrastructure, access to public spaces like Grampont Nature Reserve, to remove the Thames as a barrier to connection from that part of the city to the rest of this city. So it's a wider construct that the infrastructures as to standalone projects set out within there to help deliver those overall aims. It's not solely to do with OSNI Mead Industrial Estate. If you go into the SPD, the OSNI Mead Industrial Estate has a movement strategy which identifies it's got a number of connections already. This is just one additional connection that we consider would be beneficial to improving active travel sort of pedestrian cycle routes. But the OSNI development could still come forward because there are still two other connection points to OSNI Mead through Ferry Hinksey Road, through OSNI Town. And that's set out quite clearly within those documents. It's a whole suite of connections. And the options around all of these different connections is all set out within a spatial framework. And we can't sit here and report all of that to you. The officer's report sets out why this is considered to be acceptable. And that's what you're considering today.
A question about development on the floodplain, which I believe is addressed in the report. Can you clarify on that, one of you?
The officer's report sets out how we've considered this. This can still be infrastructure, it can still be essential infrastructure, whether it's because what it is, it's providing those active travel connections to improve the options. We will only get active travel if we give people the opportunities to be able to walk and cycle and give them better direct routes to do so. In purpose of flood risk, we would consider, and the FRA that's submitted with the application considers this to be essential infrastructure, and that is able to be developed within the floodplain. It's not a ban on development in the floodplain. There are some developments that you're able to deliver in the floodplain. There is a sequential process that goes through that. That's set out in the report.
Thank you. Then there were two, I think we've covered the sort of questions which are really very much. There were two which maybe I'm interested in your response to the very first pair of comments from Mike Rowley. One about Cyclops, the concern about the way the rails are being proposed which would de facto reduce the width available to cyclists. And then the other one, the COSAT comment that was looking at the broader links, I think, between, I guess, Oseney Mead, ice rink, station, cycle and pedestrians.
I mean, if you read through the spatial framework for the West End, it talks about how this is going to link into the existing cycleways that run through this part of the site. As you can see on here, the purpose of this is that the development runs up towards the ice rink, alongside the ice rink, and then connects onto the Oxpens Road, which then gives you direct links across to the Westgate and the rest of the city centre, and across round to the rail station. And there are obviously cycle lanes on in that area. There may be wider improvements that come through in terms of the works to Oxpens Road that deliver further improvements, but from the current situation, this gives a direct link up onto the Oxpens Road, which then links into the rest of the town. On the other side here, the Grand Pont Nature Reserve side, there are cycle links that run through along the towpath and obviously through to Oseney Mead. There are a number of public rights of way which this connects to, and the purpose of this was it will allow a better connection for people to access there through to Oseney Mead, which is an existing site that employs a number of people, so it gives them a different option for people coming from the city centre side to access them, but also to access the cycleways that link beyond Oseney Mead that go towards Botley, Hinksey and places like that. So it's intended to connect up to all of those different routes, and in the spatial framework within the Oseney, so I keep saying the West End and Oseney SPD, it sets out quite clear what the vision is, and this is a piece that sits with that overall vision for connectivity for the wider area, not just limited and restricted to a single development site.
Okay, sorry, I think one of my earlier questions wasn't answered. I'd asked the officers about the objectors raising that the absence of an EIA may result in a legal challenge, and I'm interested in their response, please.
I was going to ask at some point for Sally Fleming, though I'm not sure she can answer for the objectors, but go.
I think the question was, you noted that the objectors have said if the application is approved, they may judicially challenge it, and how you should sort of deal with that knowledge. And my advice to you is that it should not sway your judgment of this application. It's open to objectors to say that for every application, and obviously you shouldn't be.
Just to clarify, I don't think that was my question. My question was what degree of I don't know, confidence is the right word, but how likely do you think it is that such an objection would have merit, I think is the question that I'd asked earlier.
Chair, I'm not prepared to say that in open session. I think that is legal advice that would be confidential to the committee. It is obviously open to you to resolve to go into private session if you wish. But what I would say is that you've heard what I've said about whether or not I consider it to be an integral project, whether it's one project or separate projects, and whether it's integral to those future developments. You've heard what I've said about that. Anybody who wishes to challenge a planning committee's decision has a period of 6 weeks from the decision to do so. They have to apply for permission to do so. So they have to show a prima facie case in order for it to go any further. So it's not a foregone conclusion that they would get that. And you've heard, I won't go further than as I say, you've heard my view on their arguments, and I think that's probably sufficient.
Yeah, and I wonder if we might get the view of the rest of the committee on whether at some stage we might go into a closed session for that legal opinion, which might be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
So I suggest we do that once we finish all this, because otherwise we're just going to go on and on. Go on.
Sorry, there was just one other question in there, which was a disappointment that the pictures apparently hide in the bridge. I mean, obviously, the visualizations that are provided by the applicant, they try to do their best to show the site, the development in situ. We can only obviously go out and try and give you sort of pictorial images to show that. There's certainly no deliberate attempt which was sort of the implication that it's deliberately been tried to be hidden, or the impact of the bridge is tried to be hidden. And as you can see there, you can see the whole bridge in situ. So that's just something we have to present you as best we possibly can.
Steve Goddard hasn't yet asked a question.
Thanks, Chair. Just two fairly brief questions. One relating to something mentioned several times already, I think possibly in the objectors' words, the Tewkesbury case, which I think Sally referred to something called the Canterbury case, which was referred to in the Tewkesbury case. I don't, maybe I've missed something, but I don't yet have a clear sense of the relevance of the Tewkesbury case. So if we could have that, that would be good. The second was also referred to actually in both the objectors and the supporters' speeches. I'm not sure it's a direct planning consideration, but I think it's something. The funding for the bridge was, I think, mentioned by both, and the time limitation on the funding, such that if the bridge doesn't go ahead, as I understand it, it reverts to the county council. Clearly, the money involved won't just vanish into a black hole if that happens. I would be interested to know what the potential fate of it, whether it could, in some eventualities, come back to the city for good use to be made of it, or whether it would cease to be at all available to us.
Tewkesbury case. Sally.
Yes, the Tewkesbury case followed the Canterbury case, and I think I did refer to it because the difference, in my view, is that in that particular case, it centred around a bridge and an adjacent development, and the two were linked because the bridge without the development would go to nowhere, which is not the case here, as you've heard Andrew say. There are wide aspirations for the bridge than simply serving those two future developments. So, and I think that decision was also challenged on another reason relating to the officer's report as well. But I just think having looked at both cases, I think the criteria which the judge in the Canterbury case is very useful as a checklist to go through. And having gone through it with you, it seemed to me that it was, you couldn't say it's one project. They are separate projects.
Lucy Pegg.
Thank you. I was going to first of all just say a quick comment, which was you were saying that we shouldn't bear in mind the fact that there might be legal action. I have certainly been on planning committees where there's been a commercial developer where councillors have been warned that if we said no to a planning application, that there may be financial risks to the council. And I think if we're having that comment made on as commercial developers, we shouldn't be being told in this one that we shouldn't bear in mind any financial risks to the council from a different legal action. I just wanted to make that comment in response to what you said. But in terms of actual questions, my first one was there's this thing about how if this is essential infrastructure, it can be built on flood risk free B. Has there been an assessment of need of the current need without Oxpens or OSNI need? Have there been any surveys or assessments done of what the current need is for this bridge? And then the other thing I wanted to ask was we were told earlier that it wouldn't be a material planning consideration, the fact that hasn't been a EIA done because that's sort of a separate process that officers have dealt with. I did a very quick Google of what material planning considerations are, and it says that local, strategic, regional, and national planning policies are all material planning considerations. So if we felt that the council hadn't followed national planning policy, which says that you should have done an EIA, would that be a material planning consideration, which we might decide meant we didn't want to give this planning permission?
So invite Sally first to respond because funding's been raised twice in different contexts. But do you want to respond on that, please?
Yes, it was just on your first point. I think it's slightly different because the advice that I've given previously in planning committees about planning appeals and the risk of costs against the council have been against the background of officers recommending approval for sound planning reasons and support policies, and the committee or some members of the committee proposing a refusal contrary to officers' recommendation, and officers advising members that if it did go to appeal, they would find it very difficult to defend those reasons. And in that situation of being unable to defend those reasons, that would put the council at risk of an award of costs. I think the possibility of somebody challenging a decision is more remote, and I don't think that is something which you should take into account in determining whether or not this application, which officers are recommending, should be approved because it complies with your local plan. I think that's a different situation.
I'm going to carry there's a question about the assessment of current need and whether this is essential infrastructure. But I think that was on current need, not on projected need, if I understood your question correctly. Is that right? And then you come back again to whether EIA has to be considered come what may. I feel we've rather done the EIA into the ground, but is there anything to add on the EIA? And if not, I would like us to then consider the other questions.
The council has already screened an opinion. So the assessment as to whether an EIA is needed follows a set of process through the EIA regulations, comes prior to the submission of the application. The applicant submitted a screening request to the council, and the screening request is where you review the application against set criteria and decide whether it's development that would need an EIA. And then if it is development that would need an EIA, you then have to assess whether you think it's going to have significant environmental impacts. And you go through that process. That's separate to the application process you've got here. The council have had an EIA screening opinion. They've screened it prior to submission, and their view is that an EIA was not necessary. It's not necessarily open to the committee as a material consideration whether people agree with that screening request or not. So it's not there for you to, in my view, a material consideration by which you could refuse the planning application on that basis, because you would need to set out and justify why you think that screening opinion was incorrect, and that's not before you today. So that's where I think we sit with that. I hope that answers the question. The point about need and current need for the bridge, that's set out throughout all of the evidence base for it's gone through the local plan, it's gone through the OSNE, the West End and OSNE SPD, and part of the spatial framework is all published on the website. And so the need for connectivity and what this is trying to achieve is all set out in there.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Lubna Arshad. She hasn't asked a question yet.
Just thought I'll add my little part onto it. So what would be, I mean, we're here as members to ask questions to everyone. So I don't think that we should be told what we should and shouldn't. But at the same time, I'd be very much interested into learning about what you would classify as a significant environmental effect.
We can't answer that. You can't answer that in quite a binary way. The thresholds and the criteria are all set out in the regulations, and so I can't answer that in such a binary way, what I consider to be a significant environmental effect.
Yeah, then Amir.
Okay. Andrew, just if we go back a little bit when you were talking about the fact that there are several connectivities already in these parts of town, hence it is not an essential infrastructure because there are walking and cycling routes already available, which is what I understand you were saying. That's kind of almost inconsistent with then saying it's needed to improve cycling and walking, because you're already saying there is infrastructure available, hence there's already routes available, So it's not essential infrastructure, but the same, literally a couple of minutes later, you then said, but it is needed to improve, you know, it to be consistent with our policies on walking and cycling. You're basically using the same point almost for different opposing arguments, in my view. So if you could clarify that, please. And then secondly, the question about, I think Councillor Latif talked about what happens in the NHS. I guess I also work in the NHS, but what I'm a bit baffled about is that when we're talking about sustainability and carbon footprint, etc., no real actual detailed measurements or considerations were given about looking at the current bridge that is there already. There was no detail given. It was just said it was a very short paragraph from what I remember, so I'm going to have to struggle to find exactly which page it was on. But there was no real detail given as to what the impact would be, or what the carbon footprint would be, or how it's not sustainable. The sustainability question was almost entirely directed at what is being proposed as the new bridge, not what the alternatives are, which are already in existence. And I would just like those answered, please. And just on the third point about I've done a bit of Googling, and I understand my Googling is really not equivalent, Sally, to your legal opinion. I totally accept that. But it seemed there were some similarities between the Tewkesbury case, because they talked about it was called a bridge to nowhere because there was already accessibility available, and that it was part of an overall development but the whole thing wasn't considered together. But maybe that was already addressed in what you but I just wondered where there were the similarities there. Thank you. But those 2 points directed at Andrew, I appreciate those being answered. Thank you.
Amir.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to return to a question, just not aesthetics, which I don't know has been really covered or addressed. So in the presentation, we saw lots of very nice pictures of the site without the bridge, which were generally green, lovely trees, a river running through it. I accept Andrew's point that officers can only put forward the pictures that are provided by the applicant. But it seems to me that it's a concrete monstrosity in amongst some of those, nicer green pictures. And I just wonder if I could get off. We did hear in the presentation a comment about the wave design and how it might be sympathetic. Although obviously that's a matter of opinion, and I don't know that I would share that, but really just that how we're meant to interpret, that issue of aesthetics. Because if I was looking at it purely on that point of view, I would say really it's not sympathetic to the surrounding existing environmental landscape. And obviously the more detailed pictures, as Andrew correctly identified, such as the one that's currently on the screen, are actually some way back. So we have kind of very limited pictures of actually what it would look like. And I'm quite worried about that, introducing that on the edge of an existing nature reserve, actually.
Okay. I feel we're rather going around some of these questions about the alternative, walking, cycling, other connections, impact of new bridge on alternatives. I'm not sure that officers have much to add, because we've been told about the disadvantages of the alternative bridges which were considered. I don't know, do you have anything to add? If not, I'd like us also then to shut that one down and try and consider the last one or two questions before we go to deliberation.
So I didn't say it wasn't essential. I've said that it is, we consider it to be, and the SPD, the supplementary planning document for the West End finds this key infrastructure. So we consider this to be key in terms of the aspirations that we've got for the West End. And I've said that that's not limited to specifically a site which has been raised at Oasley Mead. I've said that relates to, all of the other factors that we're trying to do, the movement strategy, public realm and place, opening up the green and blue infrastructure networks. So we've said that we consider that to be key infrastructure for the purposes of the floodplain and development within the floodplain. It then falls into a classification which you would call essential infrastructure. That's all entirely consistent throughout the report. The point I was making about the other connections is specifically in relation to Oseley Mead, and the question that first came about are the two interdependent? And what we've tried to say is, or explain, is that the bridge Oseley Mead does not solely require this bridge to be provided to deliver development at Oseley Mead. And if you read through the documents, in the SPD, it talks quite clearly about all of the various connections that Oseley Mead has. So if this development doesn't go ahead, the point being is Oseley Mead and redevelopment, that is still likely to go ahead because there are other connections that that can be delivered to develop that site. So that's not meant to be an inconsistency. It's explaining the difference between what's being presented about Oseley Mead and the bridge itself.
Sorry, Andrew, can I just clarify that question? Because one of the applicants suggested that might put the Oseley Mead development at risk, I thought I heard. So just want the officer's view on that. You don't think it would materially affect the Oseley Mead development?
No, the SPD talks about and the spatial framework talks about various scenarios when different connections are provided or not provided. So no, I don't believe it would stop that.
I think, to be honest, on the aesthetics, I don't know if there's anything that can be answered. I think that's up to us as individuals. But I'm going to take Lubna, Mike, and Steve, and then I hope we can finish this part of the meeting and then turn to discussion and then finally to deliberation.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question obviously is a major planning application, and I wanted to ask about the requirement of the biodiversity net gain, because I understand that it's 10% of biodiversity net gain now. As per legislation, the Environment Act came into play in February 2024, and here it's listed 5%. So why is it that you put minimum 5% and not minimum 10%? And my second question, if you may, Chair, yes, relates to the fishes. Is this river going to prevent any fishes or similar species moving up and down the river?
Thank you, Chair. It's just that I haven't heard the reply to my question about the safety of cyclists crossing the bridge. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. On the lean rails, I know that was raised, and it's also referenced in my report at 10.48. The applicants looked at it.
So you can't leave.
Yeah, so in 10.48 it talks about about the vertical elements, and the applicants have looked at that, and it is still compliant with the design manual for roads and bridges, but we understand the concern, and the County Council Highways are happy with the layout of what is proposed or with the bridge. In terms of the BNG, so you're correct in that the 10% is required as of February, so applications submitted after February. This application came in last year, and therefore the 5% is the standard we're working with. And in terms of the fishes, the bridge won't impact on the actual river flow, so I don't think it'll impact on the way that the fishes travel.
Chair, is it all right to ask one more question?
Okay, come on.
You know, with regards to the safety element of the bridge. So for example, if people are walking down or cycling down, how secure is it that nobody falls off?
Thank you. So yeah, so in terms of, as you can see in the image, there will be handrails and there will be a parapet. So, and that's designed again for the manual for roads and bridges. So it will have the sufficient height in terms of that level of protection when people are using it.
Okay, I'm going to take Councillor Goddard. Steve, come on.
Thanks very much, Chair. Sorry, like Councillor Rowley's, I think there's a question of mine which I haven't heard an answer to, which is to do with funding and eventual fate thereof.
Sally,
Chair, that's not really material planning consideration, so it shouldn't really, yes, you shouldn't really take that into account. You wouldn't ask any other developer whether or not their funding was at risk.
Oh, come on. So what we're going to do, unless there's another question, I'm going to suggest, not just for Councillor Latif's benefit, that, and don't everyone rush. I mean, we have to do this so people aren't collared on the way in and out. If people want to have, I'll make it 2-3 minutes break. Then if you want to go the loops around here, you can pop out quickly and then come back.
Chair, excuse me, councillors, sorry, before you rush off, could I just advise you that you shouldn't talk to members of the public, and because you could be seen to be influenced by doing so. Thank you.
I hope that everybody is suitably relieved. Not at all. I know who has the biggest bladder here. That's me. We should now go and have discussion among just the committee members, and then we should go to deliberation. So who would like to kick off? Would you, Mike, in terms of cycling and so
on? Thank you. In terms of cycling, and I mean, I suppose I am also partly looking for two officers for guidance here. Is there any way that we could condition the measures being taken to ensure this the safe use of the bridge for pedestrians and cyclists, in terms of, for example, a surface treatment that would be conducive to low speed, which might go some way towards addressing Cyclox's concerns and achieve the objective which is in the report. It states that it is intended that cyclists should cross the bridge at a low speed. Would that be something that could be conditioned or not?
So we can have an informative relating to that, but just so that you're aware, the County Council have commented on the application, and I understand that the bridge has also been built in accordance with specifications that meet the required standards. So we imagine that obviously at some point this bridge would be adopted by the County Council as a highway structure that would meet their standards, and it's implicit within that the surface would be acceptable for use by cyclists and pedestrians alike, meeting those requirements in terms of the surface and speed.
Thank you. In which case, I would suggest that if the committee is minded to accept the proposal, that be added as an informative in the way that you've suggested.
Apologies, I am not familiar with the officer, and everyone else has a name badge, but the officer
No,
doesn't. Okay, thank you. And sorry, I don't know his role. He's just you're just one of the case officers, or I'm so sorry, I don't know you.
He's got a loftier position than that. He's one of our team leaders in our West team. Unfortunately, we forgot his name badge.
It's quite clear. I just wasn't sure who I was hearing from. Thank you.
If I can also comment on the cycling side, I think the Cyclox comments regarding the rails, which de facto reduce the width from the 3.5 to 2.5 meters, that is a concern. And I would like, if it's not possible with a condition, if it's acceptable to the county, I would like an informative that something should be done to adapt the design of railings so that you do get the full width. I'm familiar with the canal towpath, which often does get very narrow, and I don't want this to be a similar one. This is going to have two-way traffic. I mean, quite active two-way traffic if the forecasts are correct. So I hope we could add an informative about that if we are minded to approve this. Any other particular questions, issues before we go to decision?
Okay, so I think what I actually wanted to say is about sort of just, I guess it's a bit meta in the mode of some points earlier, which is just, I mean, I haven't been on planning committee for, I guess, a couple of years now, but I think it's really important that we make sure that when we're entering deliberation, we're doing it on the basis of material planning considerations and giving great weight to the opinions and advice given to us by the planning officers and the planning lawyer, because I think we've had lots of different perspectives this evening, and I think it's just really important to remember that, you know, we have to look at this as a planning application in front of us, that while we may be able to ask for informatives or slight changes in the section 106, it's not something that we as a committee can amend, change or reject on any basis other than the fact of the report before us and the and based on the advice of our planning officers.
Sorry, can we just get clarification whether that's true? I think Lizzie said we can't reject it based on anything other than the report. Surely our opinion comes into that. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Can I just add? I do understand that the planning officers have a whole load more experience than I do. This is the first planning meeting I'm coming to. I guess the challenge is that some of the answers, I think there have been inconsistencies in, and I know time is of the essence, and therefore actually going into a to and fro makes it very difficult, but it does make that quite challenging to fully accept some of the advice when you think it's not necessarily been consistent in the advice that we've had, and I think that has been quite difficult as someone entering the first planning committee.
I think I would disagree with you on that. I mean, they gave informed answers, and when probed, like over the various detailed documents, both for Oathney West End development. I mean, this has a big background, this whole application. And I believe that there was a lot of consistency when it was explained to us, but we haven't, as individuals, read all those documents.
Chair, if I might, I think that was the whole point, which was we were told it was not an integral part. And then in the responses, we were told we should go away and read several other reports, which I'll be honest, I haven't read because they weren't put before me in the planning committee. And I think that is one of the big inconsistencies that I found as someone new to one of these planning committees.
I think that's true of all planning applications. If you want, there is a whole literature of the planning policy, but we have to make do with what we have with our limited time.
We might agree to disagree, Chair.
And you, can you be quiet, please? Councillor Smoten.
Thank you, Chair.
Come on.
Thank you, Chair. So it seems to me that there's a few things that have been discussed at great length today.
Quiet. We are doing it according to the planning committee rules. Can you please be quiet? Can you please be quiet? Can you please be quiet? Thank you. Look, I'm going to suspend the meeting if you make a lot of noise. Please be quiet. Can you, I'm going to. We are doing our duty here. We have received and read copious emails from many people, and we are now doing the deliberation, which is our job. Can you please, there are always two sides to a planning application, and we are considering it. Can we now go and consider, are we in a position where we can put this to a vote?
Do you mind if I carry on?
I know, we need a seconder, but
I was going to conclude this with a proposal. I won't now if Councillor Pegg wants to come in first. But I just wanted to briefly try to recap because there's a few things that we've spent quite a lot of time on today. There's been a lot of back and forth about the EIA, the necessity thereof or not, and integrality, if that is a word, whether that is important for that. And it seems that all of that has been somewhat redundant in the face of the legal opinion that the EIA is a matter for the screening request, and that the screening request is a separate decision to what's here today. So that seems to me to deal with that objection. There's the original reason that this was called into the committee relating to RE2, but that seems to be quite well dealt with in the report, in that RE2 is clearly phrased very much about internal land use efficiency of a site and doesn't really seem to be applicable to what's in front of us today. There's the discussion about building in flood zone 3B, although I'd say I find that particular line faintly absurd because of the fact that this is a bridge. It inherently enters the water and therefore is going to enter flood zone 3B. So it doesn't seem to me as if there's a substantial reason to object there. And oddly enough, we've barely spoken about damage to nature, because that seems to me the main reason that people are here. And yet it's also barely figured in the discussion today, and therefore hasn't been explored in much depth. But for what it's worth, my experience personally with bridges of a similar nature hasn't been that they are a blight on their setting in terms of the natural value of that setting. They obviously inherently involve an access path that gets to it, and to a degree there are already access paths in that Grand Point Nature Reserve that serve the existing bridges in that area and that join up with the towpath. But experience of similar sites suggests to me that they can, despite the presence of the bridge and the essential supports of the bridge, nonetheless be substantially green spaces and substantially enjoyable, pleasant, natural areas, albeit one that features this piece of human infrastructure. Consequently, it seems to me that there isn't a material reason to reject this in front of us. I appreciate Councillor Pegg wants to go next, so I won't at this point propose a vote, but I'd be happy to do so in due time.
Yeah, so well, I was similarly to Chris going to say that it's probably a useful point for people to maybe set out where their thinking is. And I think my thinking is that I would be minded to say that we reject this application, and that our material planning consideration for doing so is that we don't think that this is essential infrastructure, and so the sequential test, I'm not sure on the wording of this, but the sequential test that needs to be met in order to build on flood zone 3B hasn't been met. That is at the moment what I would be minded to say, which is perhaps useful for other committee members to know as we decide what kind of process we want to go through with votes.
I think if we're setting out our stalls a little bit, I think Councillor Smoton's already stated very eloquently a lot of the way that I'm seeing this application at the moment. I think there are a couple of things that I sort of pulled out of the discussion. I think one of them is this sort of idea of the difference between essential and essential to. So I think we've been talking about essential to with integrality, but just because something isn't essential to something else doesn't mean it might be considered essential infrastructure in another way. And I think that's one of the things that we've been grappling with. And I think the key thing is that we're trying to build more connections. So it's going to be essential in the sense that it's linking up lots of different things. And so I think that kind of addresses the integrality point and the essential infrastructure point in one. I think we've talked about a lot about kind of different options, but I don't view it as the job of the planning committee in a way. I think it's that we've had really clear sort of discussions, and we've really probed the idea of whether the alternative options were considered, but it's not our job to look at a set of options and decide what we think is best. It's to judge the application that's before us. So, under that, I would agree with Councillor Smoten that I think we should recommend for approval, because there are no material planning considerations on which we could recommend refusal, and because I think it's going to bring a net positive to the area in terms of increased connections, active travel, connections to sort of places which are already important in Oxford, and also to nature. So that's where I'm sort of sitting at the moment. And also we've had lots of people.
So do we have a proposal from Councillor Smoten, seconded by Councillor Diggins?
But before I do so, Chair, is it too late to ask officers to elaborate? Because I know when Councillor Pegg mentioned building in 3B, there was sort of mutterings from the corner with regard to whether or not that was a viable grounds for rejection. Is it too late to ask them to elaborate on those half overheard remarks?
Thank you, Chair. So the point here is about what is essential infrastructure. I think we all have quite a clear idea in our head of what essential infrastructure is. And obviously, we've talked about it somewhat obliquely in relation to the EIA requirements about whether this is essential to the unlocking of various other sites. But you need to put that to one side in relation to how we're looking at that for flooding. For flooding, the essential infrastructure is something quite specific in terms of what is allowed in different flood risk areas. So the National Planning Policy Framework, that I've actually got the relevant stuff in front of me here, it refers to essential infrastructure as essential transport infrastructure, including mass evacuation routes which have to cross an area at risk, essential utility infrastructure which has to be located in a flood risk area for operational reasons, including infrastructure for electricity supply, blah, blah, blah. That's just in relation to electricity, water treatment works, wind turbines, solar farms. So clearly this is something which is essential that would have to be located within an area of flooding. A bridge is always going to be located, well, a river bridge is always going to be located above water. So this government requirement relates to specific types of development that can be built where no other development would be acceptable. Clearly, houses being built in the middle of a river would never be acceptable, but a bridge always would be, because a bridge is by its very nature straddling an area of very high flood risk and in fact a river channel. So that term, just need to be very careful here, that where it's referenced in the officer report in relation to flooding, that is in relation to this specific set of requirements. Thank you.
Could I just to probe that a little bit? So I think that in the documents this is seen to be essential infrastructure because it's a flood evacuation route for Oseney Mead, I think, but that's a development that hasn't been built. So if that's the reason it's essential, we've said there's other active travel routes, there's other pedestrian routes, there's 2 other bridges nearby, so it doesn't feel like it's an essential piece of infrastructure to me.
No, it's not meant and designed as a dry access route because, as you quite rightly say, at the moment there is no development, or there's always existing development at Oseney Mead. That's not the intention. The intention is that for the development is as set out in the report. The point Rob is trying to highlight is this is how you consider development in a flood zone and what development can be located in the flood zone. So the issue about the dry access route and whether one of the members of the county council has highlighted and said this would provide dry access from Oseney Mead, that is not necessarily relevant. We've got no evidence at the moment to suggest that this is being used or provided as a dry access route. That's not been presented in any of the documentation at the moment.
But we could say it's not essential because there's other bridges and other transport routes? Or is a bridge always essential? Every single bridge is essential infrastructure. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, we're going round in circles. If you've read the report, there's fairly detailed discussion about why the other bridges are not acceptable. They're not readily able to take extra traffic. If you ever use the bridge that's under repair, they are, you know, I mean, they go through the immediate alternatives in the report, and this one is intended to be the most efficient way to handle.
Chair, sorry, just to clarify, you're not saying, you wouldn't be saying this is not the essential transport infrastructure is the assessment as to how you assess something like a road or a bridge that might have to go through a flood zone. You wouldn't say this is not essential infrastructure because you consider there to be another bridge in the locality that's suitable. That is not the assessment. That assessment comes through any sequential testing that you might do in terms of what you would provide or whether there are other options along on thing.
Please be quiet.
Please
be quiet.
So it's not as your I'm not sounding clear, apologies. But the assessment, this doesn't not become essential transport infrastructure for flood zone purposes because there are other bridges in the locality. That's the point.
Can we now proceed? Do you want to make your proposal?
Sure, yeah. I mean, personally, quite aside from the essential question, to me, the most persuasive aspect here is the spirit of the regulations regarding what you build in a flood zone, which is that particular kinds of things, especially housing, but also other kinds of things, are particularly unsuitable to be sited there. That seems to be the spirit of what those rules are trying to drive. And obviously a bridge is amongst the most water compatible things that it's possible to imagine. That's personally the reason why I don't find that a persuasive reason to reject. There being no other reasons that, as set out previously, that I think we should reject it for, I would therefore propose that we should approve the application.
Have a seconder. Sorry, what do you want?
Sorry, I just want to clarify, is that the officer's recommendation? Because that includes the conditions and the Section 106 agreement and possibly the informatives?
Yes, I would propose the officer's recommendations as set out in the report, including the conditions set out there and including the extra informative that was set out earlier today, which I believe the committee was minded to include.
We will clarify them, I think, if we approve. Do I have a seconder? Lizzie, put it to a vote. Can I see those in favour of approval? So it is carried. Thank you very much. Now, can we clarify the informatives, please? Which were largely this. I just want to be clear what we are.
I don't recall the informative in detail.
That's why I want to clarify. I mean, the ones which I recall are on the surface in order to make it less possible in a crowded two-way traffic with cycles and pedestrians.
There was the guardrails.
Yes, and then also the guardrails. The things which I feel should be included, I thought were persuasive in the comments, were from the Thames Valley Police about, if possible, as people are coming out from a busy area, about CCTV, but more to the point, lighting.
The decision's been taken. I
Yes.
think it's too late to go back on.
I'm sorry, I thought the chair's proposal was that we would take a vote and then suggest the informatives later.
The proposal was the officer's recommendation, which included the conditions in the Section 106 agreement. and Councillor Smelton mentioned the informatives as well. And I think the chair was just clarifying after the decision what they were. But I was just indicating to the chair that we can't really include an additional informative because the decision has been taken. I think there was one from was one about the resurfacing and one about adapting railings. So
Because that's not what the chair had said. The chair had said we will take a vote and then
I
we'll come back to
obviously took it in the wrong order. I had two other informatives which I do think would be helpful, but I didn't take them before we took the vote, so it's my fault. So, but I stick with those two which were mentioned by Councillor Rowley as well. So thank you very much. Need to approve then the minutes of the meeting, the last meeting in very distant times. I guess we approve. I'm not sure who was present among those on the committee today. And finally, well, we have no idea when the date is of a future meeting. Yeah. Actually, I was here at the last meeting and I did see the minutes and they are correct, yes.